Yes.
Okay, so we open the meeting to the public. Okay, morning everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Social Development Committee. Could just do the usual housekeeping, could ask people in the room to switch off all their electronic devices, and there may members of the use and the protocols around the use of the electronic tablets and so on. Again, advise ourselves to refer to the page numbers at the top of the pages when we're dealing with different documents as the meeting goes on. Just to note, and to ask any members to any interest relevant to today's agenda. There are none declared. We move on to apologies. We have apologies from Michael Copeland, Gregory Campbell and Sammy Wilson. Any other apologies to report? None at the moment. Okay, so thank you for that, members. Moving on to draft minutes, page 5. Just asking members, are you content with the draft minutes from the meeting of the 4th of September 2014? Members content? That is agreed. The minutes. Just item number 3, chairperson's business. I just want to draw attention to the minister during the inquiry session in the Assembly the other day, the debate, and also a question time on Tuesday, if I recall, made reference on a number of occasions that the committee spending time, and I'm just paraphrasing, but spending time in the inquiry while not doing other social development business. And I have to say, I take acceptance of that on behalf of the committee, given the volume of work that the committee has been involved in, particularly in collaboration with the department itself. So I just wanted to place on record by writing to the Minister on behalf of the committee that, just to set the record straight, we actually have very significant volume of work, both under our belt already for this mandate and for the foreseeable future. We have been in considerable discussions through the clerks with the department about scheduling legislation and other briefings. I'm content that we do that.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, thank you. It will be a factual stating of the record. Okay, members, so thank you for that. Going into the matters arising then. You'll recall that last week we had Damien Martin here to deal with a letter from the Departmental Solicitor's Office in respect to the committee's inquiry and the conduct of the inquiry and so on. There was a fair discussion on that last week in closed session, and we had a draft letter for your consideration, and we agreed basically that we would just defer that because some members thought they wanted a bit more time to read that, and there's some members absent last week. So we've taken some, I suppose, trouble from last week. People have all of the documentation since before last week, and they've had it throughout the week. The officials have been on the members. So without going into, I mean, if people want to deal with this in closed session, we can do that. But I think if members are content that really the committee response following the legal Assembly legal advice and procedural advice, we retain the procedural guidance principles that we have utilised up to now. We've clarified one or two elements of that, and as I say, that is contained in the draft letter. So if members are content to deal with it now, just by way of agreeing the departmental, the committee response as per the draft letter, we can deal with that now. If members content with that, that seemed to be the view last week. Okay, so take it then, members are agreed. Thank you for that. Then we'll issue the letter to the department and the DSO this afternoon. Thank you. Further matters arising would be that we had agreed to seek a briefing from the department on the business plan of the department. The department's keen to publish the business plan, as advised to be not a great deal to cover in a briefing. That would be new information to the committee. So we're going to suggest that rather than go ahead with a specific briefing on the business plan, that we would obviously be taking a briefing from the department on the October Monday round on the 25th of September, and that we can ask any other, business plan related questions at that section. So members content, we schedule the October Monday round discussion with the department on 25th of September in lieu of a briefing which they say that it's really would be superfluous at this stage on the business plan. Members happy enough with that?
Good.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to, next item on matters arising, just in terms of the plant maintenance, just by way of information as well, just to bring to our attention that next week at the meeting we will have oral evidence sessions beginning for phase 3 of the inquiry, and we'll also be dealing with the issue of the plant maintenance, and we'll have a briefing from the Minister, the Permanent Secretary, the Chair and Chief Executive of the Housing Executive on the plant maintenance settlement and those related matters.
Are they all coming together?
Yeah. Yep. And I'm not sure how I haven't actually even thought about where we take people one at a time or 2 or 3 at the table at one time, but we can work that out. I mean, we'll have them all here at the one session. So if there was any cross arguments or any cross reference, we're going to deal with all that. So members then happy enough for that. So what we're going to do next week then, we'll have that session at the beginning of the meeting. Then we'll go on to other committee business, and then we'll recess or adjourn for a short period for a lunch, and then we'll resume then for the inquiry for the rest of the afternoon or however long that actually takes. Members can tab that the process for next week. Next item, matters arising. Just as is per normal, we have whenever we get submissions from people in relation to the inquiry, in respect of inquiry phase 3 here, we're moving into. We have a number of written submissions provided, and I see some of them have ended up in the public domain. Our members can then we publish those on the Assembly website. That's been the norm. Okay, thank you for that. Again, in respect of the BBC, members, obviously, we agreed last week that we would write to the BBC in respect of attending and give evidence, and also the provision of any documentation that they might have. We have received further papers, some of which I think are in your table pack. I mean, Claire and the other officials here have had some of that, have had a chance to go through some of that. So we've had more information from the BBC and more to follow in the next sort of week or so. So you have, we had a draft letter, did we, from the BBC? On the table down. So obviously this is going to be ongoing work. This is page 3 of your table down.
Could we ask the staff, in anticipation of next week, if they could prioritise releasing to us anything that might be relevant to any of the witnesses coming next week?
Probably not that.
As early as they can.
Yeah. Okay. Just fill that out. Okay. Okay, so members content with the draft letter then, that response so far. This is ongoing work, you should appreciate. I mean, we've done this as best we possibly can do. Again, last week there was reference drawn to the number of MLAs, for example, in East Belfast, who had dealings with contractors and so on, and there was a suggestion last week about inviting other members, other local representatives who had also had similar engagements. So members content then that we would just then write to them on the same basis. Okay, thank you for that. And you'll find that also in your draft letter there in your table items. Okay, so that will be issued then to the members as well. If members are content then we move on to the next substantive item on the agenda, which is the committee inquiry phase 2. So we're moving in the inquiry session. Okay, so this session is the evidence session with the Northern Ireland Audit Office. And that you'll have your papers there on page 26. And can formally then invite Kieran Donnelly, Thomas Wilkinson, Brandon McMaster and Hugh Kane. And can say, well, you're all actually very welcome. And this is obviously in respect of phase 2 of our inquiry, and just to kind of very basically try to characterise what phase 2 is really about, trying to establish that all of the, with a range of deficiencies and so on and problems had been identified, then a range of recommendations had been put forward by various bodies, including your own, and we want to satisfy the committee via the inquiry that all of those measures and whatever other appropriate measures are taken on board to deal with the identified problems in the past. So we've got to satisfy ourselves as a committee as part of our role here in phase 2. Is the department and the Housing Executive taking all on board all the necessary precautions, and to that extent then we wanted to hear from yourselves, because obviously you have a very critically important role in all of this. So I'd like to, without any further ado, then just invite yourself, Kieran, and your colleagues to present to the committee. Is that?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee. Just regards my colleagues, Brandon McMaster on my right, he led the value for money inquiry we did in 2012. So that's more the older material. Tomas Wilkinson and Anu on this side deal with the up-to-date stuff. Tomas is the director of the audit of the accounts, so is the more up-to-date position.
Thank you.
I suppose I'll start off by saying that the issues relating to contract management, both unplanned maintenance and response maintenance, these are issues we've been reporting on for some considerable time. Back in late 2008, a whistleblower first approached the Public Accounts Committee about concerns relating to response maintenance, and we brought those issues to the Housing Executive and the Department. The issues were then investigated by the Executive and an independent firm, ASM Harworth. And over the next sort of year or so, we became really increasingly concerned that there were general issues relating to the management of response maintenance contracts. And in 2011, I decided that we should do a detailed value for money review. That report was published in September 2012 and led to a Public Accounts Committee hearing in the same month, and then a report from the Public Accounts Committee followed shortly afterwards. Now, I've just got through some of the key strategic issues that were raised by the Public Accounts Committee at that time. They go far beyond, I suppose, one particular contract or contracts in general. They get right into the heart of governance issues within the Housing Executive. So there were some big, wider governance issues, and I'll mention four. First really was about the quality and reliability of information going up to the Executive's Board and the Audit Committee. There were problems there. Both was the right information going up, so important things were not being escalated, particularly where there were problems with contracts. In a sense, sometimes the committees were bombarded with a mountain of paper, but there was lack of clarity on what the key issues were. So that was one of the big issues. Also, at that time, issues were being raised by the Executive's Internal Audit Unit and the Corporate Assurance Unit, and we had concerns about the independence of both, and that was a big issue at the time. We also said, and the Public Accounts Committee said, the third point was that the Housing Executive should not be a cold house for whistleblowers. I think there was a need to take whistleblowers seriously, so that was another key strategic point coming out at that time. And also, when the committee reported, there were a lot of outstanding investigations into various contracts, and the committee had recommended that those be completed as soon as possible and the weaknesses eradicated. Now, in each of these big strategic issues, there's definitely progress has been made. The papers now going to the Board and the Audit Committee are much more succinct, and they highlight the key issues arising. And there's also evidence that the internal audit and the corporate assurance units do not have the same degree of challenge from line management that they had in the past, and their draft reports are being cleared quickly. In the past, if there were difficult issues in reports, sometimes draft reports did not emerge for a very long time. That problem has been addressed. There are revised whistleblowing policies in place, and progress on whistleblowing investigations is now discussed at the Housing Executive Audit Committee. Also, the various investigations that were outstanding at that time, most of those have been brought to conclusion. Now, at the same time, we've been carrying out each year an audit of the accounts, and there continue to be issues around both planned maintenance and response maintenance. So we've been qualifying I've qualified my audit opinion on both response maintenance and planned maintenance every year since 2010-11. And in 11-12, I think we stated there were still, systemic weaknesses in contract management. Bringing it right up to date, the 13-14 accounts are being led today in the Assembly. My opinion is still qualified on both response and planned maintenance, but we have seen considerable improvement, mainly in response maintenance, but I would like that improvement to be sustained for another year before lifting the qualification. There are probably more unresolved issues in planned maintenance, so I'll come on to that in a minute. There's various initiatives the Executive has taken, and one of the most important ones is improved training for its staff, and the placing of intervention teams really in poorly performing districts, and that is beginning to work. Now you'll see from the briefing that the results of the various inspections have lifted considerably, much better last year. Nonetheless, we qualified our opinion on response maintenance because really we want to see those improvements sustained. Now, on planned maintenance, the assurance unit, the Executive's own assurance unit, has shown that 14% of schemes examined last year were given a limited or unsatisfactory opinion. But that's a lot better than before. But we still have some concerns. One, that particular unit have not had a quantity surveyor on their team for some time, which has meant that the work is focused mainly on ensuring the quality of the work done and less at the financial aspects. So the Executive recognises this as an issue, but it's one that needs to be dealt with. Also, I think there were gaps in coverage on certain types of work, particularly heating installations. Planned heating maintenance was 28% of the spend last year, but no work was carried out in this area by the Corporate Assurance Unit. There's also one area where a whistleblower has come forward on, there's a recent one on issues around planned maintenance schemes, and that has resulted in the dismissal of 2 members of staff. Now, the Executive themselves were concerned that this was an area that had been given a satisfactory rating by the Corporate Assurance Unit, and they themselves have launched a review into how these ratings were decided on planned maintenance. That review is still to be completed, so that story isn't finished. So because of the uncertainties around these issues, we again qualified our opinion on planned maintenance. So there's more unresolved issues on planned maintenance than on response maintenance. Also, a significant issue that has been reported over the last year has been the overpayments arising from planned maintenance schemes. We've discussed that in detail in part 3 of today's report. And I am aware that the Chair and the Chief Executive of the Housing Executive are coming up next week and to go through that in detail. But I think the key point is here, regardless of the amount that was eventually recovered, it's very clear that the original contractual arrangements were not working. The way the contract was supposed to have worked was that reimbursement was to be carried out when the actual work was done for each scheme. And this measurement at that stage then would allow adjustments to be made against agreed standard cost. But that was not done for a number of years. And really what was happening, the executive was going back, trying to do the calculations over time. Now, what we had, I suppose, was a light touch regime which really operated on trust. And proper arrangements have been in place at the outset, including remeasurement. The whole issue of overpayments, underpayments would not have emerged in the first place. So there was really a whole mess around overpayments and underpayments, but the root cause of that problem was that there wasn't proper compliance. The executive wasn't managing the contracts properly in the first place. That was the root cause of the problem. And I think we said straight that it was unacceptable for that situation to have arisen. That's really all I want to say at this stage, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, and obviously just to remind ourselves that we have a significant amount of material provided by your office, so thank you for that. And I know you've addressed the issue, you touched on the issue that we're going to be dealing with next week in terms of the car maintenance contract settlement, and whilst that's not specific in terms of the inquiry, in the first instance, if members could focus their minds on phase 2, which is really dealing with the adequacy of the actions proposed by the Minister of the DSD and the Housing Executive to address the previous well-documented failings in relation to the management. And if I hear you right, Kieran, what you're basically saying is there's been significant ongoing improvement, particularly in regard to response maintenance.
Yes.
You want to see that sustained at least into next year before you will lift your qualification.
I think that's a fair summary, Chair. Yep.
And you want then to see significant improvement in relation to plan maintenance.
Yeah, there's still some doubts on the regime, plan maintenance regime. I want to see those sorted out.
But overall, it's certainly more positive, and in terms of, from our point of view, we have got to address the key issue for phase 2 is that have the actions which have been identified, which required to be taken, have they been embraced, have they been taken, and then obviously are they satisfactory, and of course that will be ongoing to determine that. That would be my understanding. So it's an ongoing improvement situation, but you've identified specific areas where there clearly does need to be more work done.
I think it's fair to say all of this started from a low base.
Yeah.
So it was a bit like turning around a tanker, and the whole approach to managing contracts had to be fundamentally reviewed. So they're definitely going in the right direction.
Yeah, and that's obviously, I think, probably very much welcome in hearing that. But one point I wanted to make was, we had a recent meeting with the chair of the Housing Executive, Donald Houlis, accompanied by Professor Robert Peters, who's the chair of the audit committee, and I specifically addressed the issue of whistleblowers and the context for whistleblowers and the lessons been learned. And I have to say, when I read your material, I'm not satisfied with responses I got that particular day. I have people to check a record for that, because I think we were not given as much information as we should have. So I feel a wee bit kind of blindsided, but nevertheless, certainly I'll be writing to the Housing Executive just to ask them to clarify. We will refer them to the notes in Hansard of that particular meeting. But overall, you're saying that we're going in the right direction, I think, which is, I think everybody want to hear. Members? Jim? Go on.
Yeah. You've described to us quite graphically in the documentation you've given to us all the difficulties and the deficiencies within the Housing Executive. I want to start by asking you, the department has a housing unit, which is supposed to have an oversight role.
Yes.
Is it self-evident that they too fell down, or do you make any criticism of that?
Right. If we go back to the PAC inquiry, 2012, the PAC were very clear that there were deficiencies in departmental oversight. So in that earlier period, there was quite a hands-off regime. Now that has significantly changed over this past few years. So, for example, the department now is copied into draft internal audit reports and reports from the corporate assurance unit. So that's a much better regime. They're also represented, or they attend the audit committee. So there probably has been a sea change in terms of departmental oversight, probably going back to what, well, at least certainly the last 4 or 5 years.
So they're now doing what they always should have been doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of the corporate assurance unit, for example, did any of the whistleblowing implicate that unit?
There is a, if you want
In terms just of the recent whistleblowing, there are issues relating to plant maintenance in one particular area, and that reflects on the people who work there. The investigation is still underway, so it would probably be unfair to get into too much detail on that. But I think the issues, and it identified wider issues in that the CAU had given that area a satisfactory rating. That may be partly to do with the fact that they didn't have a quantity surveyor. Because had they had a quantity surveyor...
Still don't have a
They
quantity?
do, I think, as of now.
Right.
But they didn't have a quantity surveyor. Had they had a quantity surveyor, they might have been expected to identify these issues.
But how far was the work of the CAU and their predecessors hamstrung by the challenges of management?
They certainly were hamstrung in the earlier period. There's absolutely no doubt about
And
that.
how high did that challenge go within management? How high within management did that
challenge
go?
was up at a senior level.
How senior?
You're certainly talking about one down from the chief executive.
One down?
Yeah, at
What
least.
director's that?
They have now gone, retired a number of years ago.
In all of this, what you called mess, was anyone ever disciplined?
Not that we're aware of.
Does that surprise you?
In terms of, certainly people had left the organisation before the reports were finalised.
Were they facilitated to leave?
I can't answer that. That's one you would really have to put to the department or to the housing executive itself.
So.
You see, we're now going to have this sort of overview again in regard to the CAU and all of that. Isn't that right? A due diligence exercise.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to be carried out by the head of internal audit. And that unit's now to be amalgamated with CAU, is that not right?
That is certainly a proposal, yes.
What does that do for the, let's use a neutral word, the efficiency of that due diligence exercise?
But it will be looking at work that was done by the previous head of the corporate assurance unit, because there used to be two separate divisions. So now I think this due diligence exercise was initiated before the two units actually merged, and obviously they have now merged. But the head of internal audit is just doing a full review of the methodology and the scoring methodology that was used in relation to plant maintenance. So I do think he is independent of...
Do you have no concerns there?
Well, we have concerns that the corporate assurance unit, what was being done in the corporate assurance unit and in terms of scoring their plan, the results of the plant maintenance inspections appears to have been inconsistent, and that is one factor in why we went a qualified audit opinion this year. So we will be looking next year closely at what they've done and at what methodology has changed and what the impact on the results are. But it's fair to say in relation to plant maintenance, we're not... the results of the CAU that are being reported this year, we have some doubts as to whether they may be more favourable than they might actually have been if under a new scoring mechanism in the future.
So what does all that mean?
I suppose there's 14% of have got limited or unsatisfactory. Had there been a different scoring mechanism, this is certainly what the housing executive were looking into, that could have been higher. It certainly
So
wasn't
was even the scoring mechanism tweaked to downplay the problems?
I don't think it was, I honestly don't think it was tweaked deliberately to do that, because it did go through a whole committee of people within the housing executive, but that may have been the result of it.
It's the type of thing we'd always be sceptical about, and you will see on response maintenance, the scores have also gone up, and there's a footnote to, I think it's table 1 there, which says we reviewed the methodology and we're content with it. We also want to satisfy ourselves, well, if you had continued with the old methodology, would you have got the same results? And certainly response maintenance, we think that that's the case. So we were satisfied on the response maintenance. There is more doubt on the planned maintenance.
Yeah.
But when we see a change in methodology, obviously we're always sceptical, and we'll want to satisfy ourselves that it's any improvement is genuine rather than a shift in goalposts.
Yeah.
Can I move on to ask you something different? The direct labour organisation, which has now been enlarged, as it were, how happy are you with it in terms of your inspections?
This is a whole new area because a number of contractors have got into financial difficulty. The work and the staff have actually transferred. So the direct labour organisation is much bigger than in the past. That creates, I suppose, a new set of issues. How do we assess its efficiency vis-à-vis contractors? So I think there are important issues for the executive there. Is that just, for example, a temporary increase in its size, or will some of that work go back out, or is it a permanent shift? So that's a new dimension, which I think we haven't really got into yet, but it will be very important to be alert to new sort of risks there.
If I could just add, I think the CAU inspect the work of the DLO and the teams on the ground as well, and the district offices, and the CAU inspect the work of the DLO in the same way as they would inspect the work of an outside a private contractor. So they're treated in the same way. So there should be the same assurance, at least over the quality of their work. I know the housing executive may have issues in relation to value for money type issues, efficiency issues, but in terms of quality of the work that's done, that is inspected.
And have you any view of whether it's adequately inspected?
It's as adequately as inspected as everybody else. So within response maintenance, yes, and obviously we have some concerns about the CAU and its scoring mechanisms, etc., in planned. But it's as well. It's inspected in the same way as everybody else is.
And is it outside your ambit to concern yourself with, huge growth there's been in the DLO on consequence of TUPE and everything else? There might be someone might be inclined to inspect and say, well, why is it this big, or is this really value for money? Do you do any of that?
It's something we wouldn't look at in terms of signing off the accounts, so it's something beyond that. But we haven't done any specific value for money work on that issue as yet, so it's not to say we couldn't, but we haven't to date.
Is there still a stream, or maybe a stream's too strong, but are there still occasions of whistleblowing coming to your attention?
No, they've stopped.
They've stopped.
They've stopped. I think that's a fair assessment. When I first came into this job, 2009, there were quite a number of serious whistleblowing cases, but there's none of hit my desk directly this last couple of years.
Chair, I have a number of questions on the part 3, but happy to leave those for now.
Okay, because we might have to actually leave that anyway, because we're, as I say, I mean, members are, and everybody else is scheduled to deal with phase 2, but we try and deal with some stuff. I mean, certainly, I mean, I wouldn't expect actually, Kieran, you'd be able to give a full report on the value for money and around the whole TUPE arrangements in the TLO, because certainly from where I'm sitting, I think it's been entirely ad hoc arrangements, and we now have a third company which has gone in the administration with requests around TUPE arrangements, and I certainly wouldn't be satisfied that that's been organised in a thought-through way or a planned way. As I say, I think it makes it far too ad hoc, and maybe not even balanced in a way, but that's, so I mean, I would be suggesting to members that we would just clarify this with the department. First of all, what is their current status around the DLO and how they're expecting to manage what is clearly an enlarged unit within there now, and just all of the ranges around that. So I can appreciate you're trying to deal with that, Kieran, but you wouldn't be able to fully at this stage again. A number of other members to come in, Khan.
Sure, thank you. Jim has touched on some of the stuff that I was going to ask, but just I know that in a past life there was a DLO within the Housing Executive, and there were people that near enough grew up with the Housing Executive for a while and provided maintenance on obviously a longer term basis. I think that the difficulties may arise now that many of the people that have been TUPE'd across, some may have came from companies where there may have been difficulties in the past, and I think that's the point that we need to make. Is there value for money there? Is the quality of work checked on a regular basis? And as Alec has said, there seems to be a new company that is came out of the whole difficulties within the construction industry.
Well, just to recap there, we can give some assurance that there's control on the quality side of it, where I'm not in a position to comment on the cost end of it, but if you're looking at value, there's three things. There's quality, cost and timeliness.
Yeah.
And I know there's been a lot of, that boils it down to three simple things. There's been a lot of debate about the key performance indicators for maintenance work. Now, in the past, when we looked at this in 2012, there were not adequate KPIs on cost and timeliness, so they were deficient. What you have now is quite an elaborate set of KPIs. I think there's 8 or 9 of them. And the latest Gateway review was sort of saying they need to be simplified. That sort of thing needs to be dealt with in a common sense way. You need simple measures of those three things: quality, cost and timeliness, and not much more than that. But back in 2012, they weren't measuring the cost and the timeliness.
There was certainly insufficient weight was given to those aspects. That's one of the things, the flaw in the methodology that we identified in our report. In essence, you could have a district in terms of where there was poor quality of work coming through, was still getting an overall assurance of satisfactory, because the weighting given to it was insufficient, inappropriate. They were focusing on other sort of areas of work, tenant satisfaction, how the contractor viewed the relationship with the housing executive, how the housing executive reviewed the relationship with the contractor at that stage, and those got much more greater focus. So we had highlighted, your methodology actually is wrong here. You need to go back and you need to look at quality. You need to look at timeliness. And in terms of the other factor, which was not included whenever we started our review, was errors in invoices that were coming in from contractors. That was not recorded. And when they started recording that, there was this very significant spike in terms of the rates of error that was coming through.
Sure, and it's just because I actually remember going back a number of years ago, standing in a constituents hall, that dug up the hall looking for a complaint, and the argument wasn't about how best to repair the complaint, but over the price that they were going to that they were going to get for completing the thing. So, and you would have thought, was remember the argument at the time, you know, I don't really care about your arguments. It's about how you repair this. So there was problems. How much did the likes of the Egan contracts or going for contracts that went for price rather than looking at the ability of the contractor to deliver? How much did that play a part in some of the problems that existed?
I think we had said in the report, it wasn't Egan as such, it was how it was applied in practice. So they took a very rough and ready approach to applying the Egan principles. I think that was the problem.
Yeah, they did. Egan was about partnership working, and the housing executive took a view that partnership working was that contractors would be honest and open with them, and they didn't require the same level of checks to be carried out. That is not what Egan was saying. Egan, the principles of Egan did still require a level of checking to be done to verify that work was being done properly and was being done in terms of cost and quality, timeliness.
I thought it was also about getting more for less, and in terms of the way they dealt with contracts and the way that they procured contracts also. But one of the other questions that I wanted to ask was the procurement of the Campbell Tickhill report. And did this fall within DFP guidelines?
Yeah,
Eventually, yes. It is consultancy. So there, as you know, there's a low threshold for criminal consultancy expenditure. The original bill, or the original bid was under the threshold, but the final amount was over.
I'm just mindful that this is not phase 2 of inquiry, so I don't want to be straying into matters which are not part of this inquiry. We will have the Minister, Chair and Permanent Secretary here next week to deal specifically with that. We did ask the Kieran in advance of today that we may well get a question or two on this, but we can't go into it in any depth, if you appreciate.
Sure, I understand.
members were
Yeah, but I understand.
also want to ask
I
the
understand.
questions.
I understand what you're saying, but Kieran and his team have looked into this.
No, I understand that.
But what I'm saying is that next week we may not have the advantage of their experience in how we deal with this.
We did say to Kieran in advance of today's meeting that we may well try to deal with this peripherally on the edge of the phase 2 inquiry. This is phase 2 of inquiry, not Campbell Tickhill report. So,
Well, preferably I'm asking.
well, that's okay. Well, I'll decide how far we go with it from. Okay, so just let Kieran just we can give a wee brief on the benefit of all the members, and then we not take another question on this morning.
I wanted to say, strictly speaking, then, because the outturn was higher than what was budgeted, it should have gone back for approval.
and it has gone back.
And it has gone back.
Yeah, because
In that perspective.
initially it was budgeted around £40,000, which just required approval by the head of DSD. But then it increased and has ended up costing more, and I think that means it now needs approval through DFP and through the Minister. And I'm not sure if that's actually been got
I think
to,
the
but it's
point,
already been
I think the
sorted.
point that Rob was making, other members were making, and we're going to move on from it, is that the procurement was done within something like 48 hours. Not even the question of a financial threshold, but anyway, that's the question that was really in the back of people's minds. But we will be obviously have to get yourselves back again to deal with other matters, including probably that. But we have to hear from the department and the Minister next week.
Can I just say one point up was it's important that I thought that when the chair of the Housing Executive was in front of this committee, that it says that he initially, when the decision was made, he went to the board there, he spoke to the board.
Okay.
But I thought in your report it said that he didn't go to the board. Because the next question I was going to ask was a conflict of interest that may exist between a member of the board and a relationship with Campbell Tickhill.
It's dealt with in the report, so I'll let you make one final. It's not. I don't mean to say I'll let you. I only want to deal with this in one final comment from yourself, Kieran, because we will have to return to it once we have the ministers.
And my understanding is it was a single tender action, initiated by the chairman. He discussed it with the department, and I don't think at the time the decision was made that he went, that there was a detailed discussion with the
If
board.
I could just add, whenever the chair went to the board, our understanding is that he agreed that they would need to appoint somebody. But the actual decision to appoint Campbell to Kell, the chair made himself as a single tender action and got approval from the DSD minister for that.
Well,
Or sorry, the permanent secretary.
we will have them here next week and they'll have to explain their process and deal with members' questions, and then following on, we will return to it in a formal, substantive way. That's the best way we can do that. Dolores?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Can I just clarify a couple of points? The report's gone back in relation to the audit concerns, go back to about 2004. I'm just wondering, within your own office and your own powers, are there any shortcomings or any areas that you think that the Assembly needs to strengthen in relation to your ability to ensure that departments actually follow up and action the recommendations?
Well, that's a good point. You mentioned 2004. That was the year with another report out that year on district heating schemes in the executive. And there's some of the issues that were in the district heating report actually come up again in the 2012 report, particularly around the whole inspection regime. That report was done under direct rule. I think what I would say through the Assembly procedures and through the work of the Public Accounts Committee, there's a much more proactive follow-up on reports since devolution. I can honestly say that. But back in direct rule days, on occasions, action on whatever report was not sufficient.
Yeah, that's not surprising in some counts because of the lack of scrutiny, if you like. However, nonetheless, there were departmental heads and permanent secretaries charged with following up on that. And the second part of my question was around the powers that the Audit Office currently has in terms of any mandatory actioning of recommendations and whether or not there's a weakness.
No, we work on the basis of influence. We have no mandatory powers, and that is consistent with how audit offices work throughout these islands. Okay. So it's on the basis of influence, I suppose not just our influence, but the joint influence of the Audit Office and the Public Accounts Committee of the Assembly.
But there would be obvious...
there's no... The process is... where we make recommendations these days, they will be considered at the lower level, at audit committees of the entities concerned. Now, for example, if we were making recommendations for a number of years, nobody's taken any notice of that would prompt that I need to go stronger and issue a public report. Since devolution, there's quite a rigorous system now for follow-up and tracking PAC recommendations and reporting back to the Assembly. So that system in general is much better than it was back in the 90s, for example.
Well, that's reassuring, Chair. But so therefore, would the Audit Office then have a chart, if you like, in relation to the Housing Executive and/or DSD Housing Division in relation to recommendations dating back even to 2004 and a progress chart, if you like? You know, how are those red flagged, other than having to research through documents individually?
Well, all recommendations that come up that we went through our annual audit procedures are followed up annually and reported on annually. So we go back in our reports to those charged with governance here with what was recommended last year and has it been implemented or has it not. And if it hasn't been implemented, we would re-recommend that. We'd also follow up anything, for example, in the PAC report in 2012, we would follow up issues that were in that. And see, obviously there's lots of issues regarding response and plant maintenance. And, we're following those up as a matter of course in our audit work.
Thank
So we
you.
do follow those up.
That's okay. And within the report, it does refer to one district remaining more problematic than the others. Can you share with us what that district is? And could I also express some concern that it seems to me that the members of staff who lost their jobs are relatively down the food chain, whilst others seem to be able to be allowed to retire. Have you any concerns around that?
Take the first one there, are you aware of the district?
Yes, the district involved is Southern District. Well, the investigation is underway, and I think that the individual who was...
You've excited the interest of members. See flags are on here. Okay.
The individual is involved with people who are directly involved in this, so I suppose the investigation continues and it may well proceed to other disciplinary action. The people who were disciplined, there was one permanent member of staff and it was one agency member of staff who went.
I think we need to be mindful of there are ongoing investigations that we cannot treat this information very sensitively. Although I do think overall, and I would put this maybe directly here into yourself, is that I think a lot of us have a picture that over a period of time, fairly significant period of time, when reports were being qualified, when issues were being raised through PAC and other fora, that there were a lot of problems identified, but there doesn't seem to have been any accountability. I personally am not that confident yet. I don't want to be disrespecting your last comments there, but I'm not so confident yet that all the system is entirely joined up, where there are problems identified, they're flagged across the piece, and then there's accountability, because what we have seen, if you take a chart of all of this and you take a personnel chart on the wall, and you would see people involved in some of these where you and others are expressing serious reservations and problems, that instead of people, in my opinion, maybe should have went out the door, seem to be going up the ranks. And then, there's no accountability. I think, the system hasn't generated accountability for a lot of these problems, but you might have a comment on that overall picture. That's certainly the picture I think most of us would actually have for the last number of years. So.
Chair, there's just one final point before maybe respond to that. It was that the concerns raised that information was withheld from the former chairman of the executive of the most important audit information. Has that now been rectified in terms of the board and the chair getting full access to all relevant and pertinent information in a timely manner?
I think I can't give you a guarantee because it's only when something happens. But our general view would be where there problems are emerging, they are escalated up to the top of the organisation, whereas previously they would have been filtered, so bad news would have been suppressed. So we certainly have seen a sea change in that, and even through our own staff would attend or audit committees. So there is certainly a change from 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think you'd see that the culture has changed, that, if you go back 3 years ago, any criticism was not welcomed at all, whereas now there's a culture of, there's certainly an audit committee, and what we're seeing talking about is a culture of let's deal with, if there are issues coming up, let's deal with them.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Stuart?
Chair, just going back a little to the, and I appreciate that people are coming next week and we will have an opportunity to ask questions in relation to the increase in size of the direct labour organisation, but it is a substantial change in a function of the housing executive.
It is a substantial change, yes. I think as the Chair alluded, it's happened by accident rather than design, really because of firms getting into financial difficulty.
Yeah.
So,
yes, but there may very well have been other ways of dealing with the situation other than just simply taking these people all under duty.
yeah.
I think what they would have, but the first preference of the housing executive is always to try to find adjacent contractors from the nearby areas to take over that contract, and that is what happens, or should happen in most cases. In 2 cases last year, it was not possible to get adjacent contractors to take over that contract for various reasons, including to do with TUPE reasons and the staff that they were going to have to take over, and to do with the pricing of the contract, etc. Because of that, the housing executive was left with no choice but to be in those staff and keep the service going.
And the consequence of that then is that those people who previously were not employees of the housing executive were never recruited by the housing executive, were never interviewed by the housing executive, were never equality checked by their recruitment processes by the housing executive, end up not only being housing executive employees, but end up in the housing executives and the public sector's pension scheme, effectively by default.
That's right.
And I appreciate the power of TUPE, but I'm equally saying at that point in time, when you are effectively doubling, nearly trebling the workforce of an organisation, increasing the cost from 4.4 million to 11 million pounds, is there a question that you may be asking in terms of the corporate governance, in terms of the decision-making processes that allowed that to happen in an incredibly short period of time? Was there an alternative to that that would have protected the public purse from that additional pension cost, that would have potentially protected the public from a recruitment methodology which is perfectly correct, but nevertheless has the potential to substantially skew already very balanced relationships within the organisation? And where are the management controls for a nearly tripling of an organisation in that space of time?
It's an issue we haven't delved into in depth,
Yes.
but I imagine as we go forward, we'll look at this closely.
And I think that's reassuring that you're telling us that you will do that.
Yeah. And I think probably there's the most recent contractor who went into administration that was taken over by the adjacent contractor in that case. So it was 2 cases last year, and the housing executive are certainly aware of it now, that that very much a last resort.
It didn't seem to be a last resort at the time.
I think one of the
Something like
things to add that in terms of PAC, whenever they considered our report and they were conscious that new contracts were being let, they were concerned, and they did express concern in their report, that the pricing of contracts was unsustainable, that there was a danger that firms would go into administration. And I think, in fact, it raises a much broader question, and it did come up yesterday at PAC in terms of when there was a follow-up response from the department to queries from PAC. I think it does raise queries over procurement in terms of where you have lowballing taking place at unsustainable rates, and I think it's maybe something that is worthy of a further consideration. Certainly, I would suggest by the public service, in particular CPD, within the Department of Finance and Personnel. Just, is this something that is sustainable? What can be done in those circumstances?
But what you're actually saying, Chair, is that the only alternative to a company going into administration or going bust is for the contract to be taken over by a public sector body. Surely there is an alternative, and that alternative is a reinvention of that company. I mean, it's in the private sector. Why didn't they just go and reform the company, or somebody start a new company? That's an alternative.
I think, sure, we're straying into...
I appreciate that, but I think, Chair, it's important that
it is, but-
and we've got a good message from the Audit Office that it is an area which is a future concern for them. The sad reality is, of course, that audit looks at things that have happened rather than predicting the future, and
That's a key to it. That is a key to it. And that is a key to it. And I do appreciate Kieran has obviously given us assurance that they will be dealing with it, but albeit more retrospectively. I think part of the issue we're dealing with here this morning is the same thing, the question that Faraz raised, and sure, the same to yourself. It's not specifically related to phase 2 of the inquiry, but because we haven't had the audit office here, probably, when it strikes me now, we probably should have had you in before, just to have a more fulsome discussion, which we will return to if you don't mind. So we did obviously advise you before today that we might stray into some of those other issues, but obviously we can't go into them in any really big depth. But what information you've given us so far has been very, very helpful. I do appreciate that. And obviously for members, do appreciate it. We do want to ask a whole lot of other questions, but we need to stick to the terms of reference for here this morning, and we will return to those big questions later. Trevor?
Thanks, Chairman. There's just one thing maybe that's been left hanging in relation to that. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with in terms of the point that Stuart has made. However, I think any of us who have come through local government, in terms of procurement there, the same shady practices happen there in terms of how the pricing and the procurement within local government is the same. So it just seems a problem throughout the whole public sector, and I think it's something that should be addressed. But I appreciate and I take your guidance that we're straying off where we should be, but I just would want to put in record that it's not just in this particular contract, but it seems to be a problem right through the public sector, and it should be addressed. Brandon, I apologise, I didn't miss the start of this here, but when I came in, you were talking in relation to some invoices coming in where you noticed there was a trend in terms of, you're talking about duplicate invoicing or wrong, invoices done wrong. Is this only in relation to this contract, or are you finding this?
This is the back stuff.
This is going into the historical back to our report in terms of just looking back where it happened. It really started in 10-11, 11-12. Prior to that, if an invoice came in for from a contractor and it was incorrect, it was not recorded as, if you want, an error.
Sorry, say it?
It wasn't recorded as an error by the district staff.
Okay.
And it was only from that point on that they started recording that. And we have what, if I can read the graph here that's in our report.
Sorry, what page is that?
That's in the old audit office, and the 12 audit office report. It would be, this is a proof copy, but it's 14 probably.
Page 14.
Yeah. Where we had rates running around about 5%, up to 5%, up to 2009-10. In 2010-11, we were up to 10%, and then from 11-12, we're heading up towards 20%.
It would be useful in terms of the 5% of what?
This is the of the invoices that are coming in.
Yeah, but in terms of value. So, I mean,
I don't know the value of those, but in terms of, I don't think we would even have that information. What we were interested in, the fact here, was a trend. This is part of the issue of the information that was going up to management.
the reason I'm asking this, and to Chair, the reason I'm asking this is, I mean, if you take 5%, and whilst we don't know, and I appreciate maybe you weren't expecting that today, but if we take the recent one where there was the, and it's been sorted out in terms of the 18 million, which was obviously calculating it down, but if there's been a trend since 2010, and it's 5% of something, 5% of what and how much is that worth? Up to 25% of something, and how much is that worth? But that's going to run us into tens of thousands, if not millions of pounds. And I think it would be useful in terms to actually try and quantify that, because there definitely seems to have been a problem within the housing executive, certainly going back to 2010, in terms of how they manage their contracts, in terms of how they manage their invoicing, in terms of how they managed actually reviewing the jobs and actually the quality of the work that they were getting. So I think it would be useful maybe if we could get that information, Chairman.
Well, we'll certainly look if we have it. In terms of just looking at the title of that actual graph, it's the percentage of failed post-inspection of response maintenance jobs, which includes a range of things, one of which is invoices which are incorrect, and they only started recording the incorrect invoices from 2010-11 on. Prior to that, it wasn't recorded, it wasn't counted.
So it would be, you could describe it as a blank cheque prior to 2010?
There was certainly a lack of proper control.
Yeah.
And obviously it's important that, it's important to understand that context so as that we can satisfy ourselves ultimately as a result of phase 2 of this inquiry that all of those issues haven't been identified, are now been properly addressed. So
yeah, I think that's useful in terms of giving confidence, but it just shows you how little control there was within the housing executive prior to 2010, and certainly given they're actually recording their feelings from 2010, 2011, it just shows you how out of control that particular department was.
and that's one of the reasons why we all are where we are today. So, absolutely. Okay. Fra, you're looking back in again on this point?
Just one question is just a matter of interest, because in the past, and running through your report is the importance of not having a quantity surveyor. But this seems to have been going on forever and a day, and I can't understand why people just didn't go out and hire quantity surveyors or a quantity surveyor. If they were that important, to find out the difficulties or identifying the problems there were in the maintenance?
I understand there was a cutback at one stage in running costs, and a lot of quantity surveyors left the organisation.
Yeah.
But technical skills is really important in this area. Much more important in the plan maintenance than the response will be low value jobs.
And also, just to be clear, the housing executive do have quantity surveyors at district level who carry out work. In our report, at least for 2013-14, we're referring to the lack of a quantity surveyor within the CAU team to review their work, to check that their work was being done properly, because within the CAU team they were unable to check that work. There are quantity surveyors, maybe not enough of them, or maybe historically there weren't enough of them, but there are some down at district level.
I think I would have left the phone, just say, could you send one of your quantities? If Mickey says maybe I'm after quality rather than quantity, so I'm hanging
I
over.
think the point you're making, Fran, is that, I mean, the clues in the title, it's a central assurance, you know, so I get the assurance
Sure.
that they don't have the personnel.
The other question was, there's been a lot said about the housing executive. You know, there's been comments made that it's rotten to the core, and certainly not by yous, but by others. And when yous were looking at the thing, was there problems at district level? Was there problems at regional level? Was there problems at executive level, or all three?
Well, if I could go back to the report that we did back in 2012, I think when we looked at the findings from the repairs inspection unit, which was basically going out and rechecking, if you want, the work that had been done at the district level, it was certainly identifying that there were problems at district level in terms of the quality of the inspection that was being done. The repairs inspection unit, we're passing that information up within the chain of command, which was the regeneration division, which was by far the largest division within the housing executive, dwarfed every other division. And basically at that stage, what we found was that their findings were not being passed on from that division up to the audit committee and up to the board. We make the point in the report that key issues were being glossed over. So, in terms of, there was an element of censorship was taking place within that division, and in terms of the information that it was passing on. So, therefore, you had an audit committee and a board which were not being made aware of the issues that were coming through. And just to put that in a context, in terms of whenever we started looking at this, and in terms of taking the performance, in 1 year, what we did, it was quite a simple thing in terms, and again it's in our report, in terms of graphically, we set out in terms of the expenditure over the year. We had high assurance, satisfactory, limited and unacceptable. And in terms of the expenditure of each of those districts, in terms of £42 million of overall expenditure, we showed graphically that £16 million was covered by a limited and unacceptable assurance rating. Now that's the sort of information that should have been going up to the audit committee and the board. That's the sort of information that should have been, that directorate should actually have been looking for. And the information was there if they wanted it. In that way, but they did not pass that information on. They didn't look at it in that way.
It was more than just the report, it was actually acting on it. There was loads of inspection going on, but the reports were just going into the cupboard. There was a lack of action on the findings.
The final point that I want to make, and all this goes back, obviously there's a trail going back quite a number of years, and obviously there's problems. Seems to be a blockage at a level within in the housing executive for the flow of information. Didn't go, but the housing executive and the department, as some people have classed it as like a parent-child relationship in many ways, that they're. Whilst the housing executive are an arm's length body, that the department have near enough that have a say in the thing, especially in terms of auditing, in terms of other aspects of it. the department share any responsibility for some of the difficulties, and this is over a fairly lengthy period of time?
All serious problems are up in an arm's length body. Usually the background is lack of departmental oversight. So sometimes when it is a problem, the pendulum will swing the other way. And I think the pendulum actually needed to swing at a certain point. The department needed to be much more actively involved. But then when things settle down, there needs to be an equilibrium.
Yeah.
A parent department cannot micromanage a large NDPB, but it needs to manage or oversee in a strategic way.
Yeah.
Are you sorry, Kieran, I'm sorry for cutting across you, but are you saying that given the extent of the problems that there was in the housing executive and the fact that whistleblowers were trying to highlight the thing, that the department missed it, or they didn't, or did they know about it? I read a report one time that the department, going back a number of years, had knowledge of that there was problems there, but didn't act on it.
There's certainly substance to some of that in the earlier period.
There is, and the Public Accounts Committee again picked that up, and one of the recommendations they have there is the committee reiterates that it is the responsibility of the sponsored department to regularly review its processes for gaining assurance in sponsored bodies' managements of risks. So, the committee did highlight that, there were problems here going back over time within the department in terms of its oversight. But I think, as the CNAG said, it's not the role of a sponsor department to get into micromanaging, but it needs to be aware of
There are problems.
We're bringing Trevor in to follow up on that there. Just, I think you mentioned the directorate there, which was there was a log jam or a blockage. Do we know what that directorate is? Can you share that with us? Or?
Yeah, it's the Regeneration Directorate within the Housing Executive.
Okay, Trevor, you wanted to follow up on that?
Well, just in terms of
Bring Jim in.
Fran's question, Brandon, in your response you said in terms of district level, you were saying in terms of inspections, but I thought our district inspectors didn't do planned maintenance. I thought they actually brought in the teams who were responsible for the planned maintenance as opposed to district officers.
I was referring to the response maintenance.
Yeah.
That's our 2012 report dealt with response maintenance.
Yeah, probably enough. Jim, you wanted in for...
Well, Chair, I wanted some clarification. You've restricted us in asking questions in part 3. Are we restricted in asking questions about part 4 of this report, dealing with housing benefit?
Sorry, Jim. Well, it's not that I'm restricted. We're dealing with phase 2 of the inquiry, so when we did alert Kieran and his team that we might want to have a little bit of an information on things like the 2B arrangements and the DLO, and then the issue that Fran McCann had raised, but we couldn't labour on those. So we appreciated some initial response because we are dealing with those in a substantive manner. For example, next week we've already agreed that we're going to be dealing with the department around the whole question of the DLO and how that's now evolving, and make sure that there's no ad hoc involved. It's actually properly planned and thought through and worked out. So I'm reminding ourselves that we're dealing with phase 2 of the inquiry. We're not dealing with phase 3 or phase 4 or any other phase, if you know what I mean, Jim. So
Well, I suppose this is something that maybe doesn't fall into any phases, but we have the audit office in front of us. It's dealing with fraud and error and housing benefit. I just want to ask a couple of questions.
Because we've given a bit of latitude, as you appreciate, so I'll put the question and then if Kieran can give us a bit of a nicer response, then that's good, and then we'll follow up with the written question.
Okay, in part 4 of your report, page 72 as far as we're concerned, that's probably different, 25 maybe in your case. Okay. Is that correct?
Starts in 20.
Yeah. You've identified that there was 25.9 million of irregular payments of housing benefit, made up of 21 million overpayments and almost 5 million underpayments. And of the overpayments, 11.7 million is customer fraud. Is that correct? And that is a huge increase from, say, 2 years ago, when customer fraud was 2.8, and indeed a 27% increase on last year. What does that tell you about the adequacy of the checking processes within the Housing Executive and the efficiency of the follow-up for recovery and prosecutions? If it's so radically increasing from 2 million to 11 million in 2 years, is that sending any message?
I suppose there will always be an element of fraud and error in any, and if you compare, and the Housing Executive will point out, if you compare these figures with GB, they will compare reasonably favourably in terms of that. These figures are based on a sample that was tested in the Social Security Agency. They have a special unit of statisticians who do a statistical sampling of all this to try to estimate the amount of fraud and error. So there will be some movement from year to year. So we take the midpoints of all of these. So the figure does look more sharp. It could be slightly less than the movement. But what does seem to have happened is there has been some increase in fraud. It may not be just as stark as those figures because there's a statistical degree of error.
But the statistical degree of error must be modest, right?
They produce a range in each year. So if you take the lower end of this year's range to the higher end of the range 2 years ago, the difference would be, it would still be a rise, but it may not just be as stark as this one. But I suppose the Housing Executives do have a strategy in place as to how they're going to tackle all this.
Is it working if customer fraud has risen from 2.8 to 11.1 million in 2 years?
What I could say, we look at this not just the Housing Executive but also Social Security Agency as well. Social Security have been bearing down on fraud and error, so that's going in the other direction. So there is an issue here. I suppose in the context of welfare reform. Benefits aren't the Housing Executive's core business in a sense, but there's a huge amount of expenditure going through here, so it's very important then that...
Was it falling between two stools?
There's a bit of that, yeah. Because it does fall between the Social Security Agency and the Executive, so there are issues there, and we find that it's the same sort of trends on rates as well on the LPS side. So there are genuine issues there that need to be borne down on.
Could I suggest, Jim, that because if I remember correctly, there was some suggestion not that long ago, but some of these figures were actually publicised, that there was some, in fact I think we dealt with it here in the committee, that there was a different mechanism or different method for counting this, something to do with taxation, HMRC or something, but obviously we will need to follow that through because it is very important, because on paper there was we were presented with it's a kind of stark increase that we need to then drill down on that to get the actual correct picture. And again, it goes to the heart of, I think, the point Jim's making, that we need to satisfy ourselves that all of the relevant and appropriate mechanisms are in place to prevent these types of problems from continuing.
Can I just ask one final question? Why are underpayments classified as irregular and overpayments are not?
It's the other way around. Oh, sorry, do you want to take the vote?
Yeah, they both are counted as irregular.
Sorry, at the bottom of page 25, all of the overpayments are irregular, whereas only underpayments made as a result of official error are deemed irregular.
Yes. So all overpayments are irregular, and underpayments due to official error are irregular. An underpayment due to a customer error, for example, if a customer is not irregular.
Yeah, understand now. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, members. Kieran, Tomas and Brandon and Anu, can I thank yourselves for attending the committee this morning, helping us in our deliberations, particularly in relation to phase 2, but dealing with the other matters as well. I do appreciate then, obviously, there are quite a number of very substantive issues what we've covered this morning, and we will be dealing with them one by one, partly as we build this inquiry and sometimes separate, although they are, in a way, all interrelated in one way or another, but we need to try and stick to our processes here. So, if you're, we'd appreciate then, we will follow up probably in writing with some of the questions this morning, but obviously invite you back again to have further
Chair, the further written queries, very happy to.
Okay, Kieran, thank you and your team. Thanks very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, members, just before we move on to the next item, I have to apologise and excuse myself, and Maggie Brady will take the chair, please. We're now dealing with the affordable warrant scheme, and we have a departmental briefing. That's page 254 of your paper. We have Stephen Martin and Eilish O'Neill here this morning. I apologise to you both for help.
Great.
Just like, sorry, welcome Eilish and Stephen. And just draw members' attention to the briefing paper on page 255 of your packs. And also ask members to note that the Minister will launch the Affordable Warmth Scheme publicly today. And I would also say that the committee welcomes the Department's extension of the Warmer Home Scheme until March next year to allow time for the Affordable Warmth Scheme to become established. And also welcome the Department's willingness to take on board some of the comments made by respondents to the consultation, such as raising the qualifying lower income threshold for the scheme. I think it's £20,000 per year now. And just I would ask you to go ahead and brief the committee. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Deputy Chair. We were last with committee on affordable warmth on the 19th of June, where we gave you an update on the consultation. And as you say, Deputy Chair, we're here today to talk to you about the finalised scheme, which has been launched today. And as you rightly say, the Warm Homes is being extended until the end of March to allow for a ramp up in terms of affordable warmth, so there isn't a gap in service. We've been working hard on affordable warmth through pilot initiatives since 2011 in partnership with the University of Ulster, with local councils and with the Housing Executive to deliver a new approach to energy efficiency improvements in a more targeted way. We had a very active public consultation, as you know, with 66 written responses, 6 public events and over 100 attendees. And following that, we've been working on redesigning affordable warmth. We now have approval for the business case for that from the Department of Finance and Personnel, and we're working on the regulations which are currently with our solicitors, and we hope that will be with the committee before the end of the year. The Affordable Warmth Scheme is a central element of our fuel poverty strategy, and the overall aim is to take a more targeted approach to alleviate fuel poverty in the most vulnerable households in the owner-occupied and private rented sector. We are working with councils, but we're mindful of the changes in local government structures. So we are working with clusters of councils, and there's a lead council being agreed within each cluster to take forward affordable warmth with us. We've been working with councils and the University of Ulster to provide each council with maps which show where the need is greatest. And each council has the top 25 fuel poverty areas within their cluster, which allows them to target. So, Deputy Chair, with your agreement, I just ask Eilish to take the committee through the key facets of the scheme, highlighting where changes have happened as a result of consultation.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. As Stephen has already mentioned, this scheme builds on extensive pilots that have been carried out in 2012 and 2013, working closely with the University of Ulster. And with the new Affordable Warmth Scheme, the role of the Council will be to use the maps that have been provided to target areas, to knock on doors and encourage householders to take up the offer of the measures which are available, to complete a survey with the householder and then refer that survey to the Housing Executive. And where a householder is agreeable, to make a referral to the social security agencies, make the call team for a benefit entitlement check, and to provide the householder with energy advice and information and advice on any other schemes which a council operates, such as an oil stamp savings scheme, which may be of benefit to that householder. The Housing Executive, on receipt of a referral, will arrange to complete a technical survey of the property, which gives them a full understanding of the measures that are required in that home. They'll determine if the householder qualifies for the scheme by checking their eligibility, and they'll work with the householder to arrange the delivery of the energy efficiency measures using local installers and an installer of the choice of the householder. And they will arrange payment of the grant. The installer should normally be accredited to a relevant trade body. And as Stephen has also mentioned, as a result of our 6 public events and our 66 written responses to our public consultation, there have been a number of changes to the scheme. Now, to qualify for the Affordable Warmth Scheme, the household income must be less than £20,000 per year and includes all the income of the owner-occupiers. Now, in our consultation document, we had suggested an income level of £16,190, and that was based on the free school meals limit and the eligibility for free school meals, and also based on information that we gained during the pilots. For 60% of the households in the piloted areas had an income of less than £16,000, and in fact 50% of the properties targeted had an income of less than £12,000. So that had been the rationale for our proposal around the 16,190. But mindful of the responses to the consultation, we reviewed that and have raised that income level to £20,000 to capture as many households in an area as possible. The measures available in the Affordable Warmth Scheme will be listed in a priority order, and this is this technical specification which will be used. And in our public consultation event, we had proposed that in a household where the householder was 65 or older and had a boiler of at least 15 years old, that boiler could be replaced as part of the scheme. And again, mindful of the responses that we got to the consultation, we have amended this so that if there is a home with a child under 16 years of age, and if there is a property where someone is in receipt of a disability benefit or has a disability and has a boiler over 15 years old, that those boilers will be replaced as well. Okay. Now, the Housing Executive technical staff have looked at the measures which are going to be available under the new scheme, and based on the information they have, the grant max for the scheme is £7,500. But where a property is of solid wall construction, that grant max will increase to £10,000 to allow for solid wall measures where they're needed. So, and the grant will also include, in case any of you are wondering, the payment of building control fees. That will be included in our grant max. It is probably useful information to give you to say that under the existing Warm Home Scheme, the average amount per household has been £1,500. So we're confident that the new measures and the grant max means that the vast majority of properties will be covered within that. The council staff will provide householders with, as I've said, energy advice. And the benefit entitlement check is a key part to maximise household income of this new scheme. And the referral to the Make the Call campaign will be really useful because the Make the Call is dedicated to ensure that people of all ages, especially vulnerable and older people, receive the money and the services and support that they're entitled to. And in 2012 and 2013, this service resulted in over 4,900 people receiving additional income of almost £17 million. Now, within the private rented sector, there are also some changes from the Warm Home Scheme. Where the property is rented from a private landlord, the landlord must give their agreement to the works being carried out, and that's also the case in Warm Homes. The landlord must be registered with the Department's Landlord Registration Scheme, and the landlord must make a contribution of 50% of the total cost of the energy efficiency improvements to their property. And although this is a very specific, targeted, area-based approach to delivering energy efficiency, there will be, at the discretion of councils, some flexibility where there is someone who meets the qualifying criteria and who lives outside of an area which is being targeted, that they may, in exceptional circumstances, come into the scheme. And that will be at the discretion of the council. Because after all of the work that there has gone into producing the maps, piloting the maps to make sure that the people who are being targeted are those in the most severe fuel poverty, that's really where we want resources to be targeted in the first instance. But mindful of the fact that there may be exceptions to that, we want to leave an element of flexibility within the scheme. So we're happy now to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks very much. Just before I bring members in, I have a couple of questions. You've talked about housing, or council officials, providing energy information and advice. What sort of training might they have?
There has been There was some training that was given to council staff to take part in the pilot. That was delivered through NEA, National Energy Action, and the University of Ulster. And it's proposed that similar training will be delivered to council staff then, and that's planned for October.
And obviously the scheme's being launched publicly today. Will any training have been done to date with council?
Some of the staff who were involved in the pilots are still the same staff who are there at the moment who will be taking forward the scheme. There will be a very slow ramp up of this as the council start then to knock on doors, and so we're confident that that will be in place.
One of the issues raised there was people being referred to the Social Security Make a Call team. Obviously, certainly my experience in the advice sector, people are reluctant initially to contact Social Security Agency as a first port of call. And is there any plans, for instance, people to be referred to like the CAB, Advice NA, or some of the independent advice centres?
If anyone prefers to use the independent sector, they're perfectly at liberty to do this. It's just to make them aware of the Make the Call campaign and the facility that exists within the Social Security Agency where someone is particularly vulnerable and needs a particular assistance through a benefit process, that they can be facilitated in that way.
So you're happy enough that
yes,
as long as the end result
yes,
is the same. And just another question, will the grant be paid directly to the household or to the installer?
they can operate it in either way.
Whichever.
So if a householder prefers to have the money and then to pay it over, or if they prefer that it goes directly to the installer.
And my last question, the thematic subgroups that were set up as a result of some work that the committee had done in relation to fuel poverty, are they now redundant in that sense because of this new?
No, it's very important that we continue with the thematic subgroups, and as you know, Deputy Chair, we have revamped. They've now changed from 4 into 2, and we had given an undertaking that we would come back to the committee later this year to give you an update on the structure and the work that the subgroups are involved in.
That's fine. I'll just bring in members now. Dolores.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure if I heard you right, whether there was additional funding being put into the fund, given that it's a broader targeted catchment in terms of people eligible. And I do welcome the income, because I very often felt sorry for people that worked and got a wee pension and were a penny over income support and got nothing. So is there more money going into the kitty?
Well, I'll cover that. I mean, no, at this stage there is no more money, but this is about targeting what we have. I mean, if money becomes available, I mean, money is tight, we all know that at the minute. If money becomes available at monitoring grounds, and this is doing very well, we'll obviously bid for more. But this is about making the best use of the money that we have in a targeted way. So at this stage there is no more money, but it's obviously something that we'll keep under review, and if money's available and we need it, we'll bid for it.
But the difficulty there, Chair, then is that, making the jam spread a lot further. So then how do you target the resources at those who are most vulnerable, who maybe don't know how to access the systems, as opposed to, say, others who are much more adept at these things?
This is why we have a targeted system. So rather than warm homes where people have to come forward, what we found through our pilots was there are a lot of people who would have been eligible for warm homes but never came forward. This is councils proactively using very sophisticated maps and statistical information to go and knock doors. So we won't be expecting people to come to us, we will be going to them in a very targeted way.
And Chair, could I just finally suggest that you may want to issue leaflets, whatever, through MLA offices, because we're quite often the first port of call to, I thought that would be useful.
Yeah, we'll take that back,
Yeah, we
yes.
will.
Yep.
Just before I bring Stuart in, just in terms of the 25 targeted areas, obviously that's going to be the focal point initially. Is there plans to expand that?
The maps that have been developed, while councils have details in the first instance, they've been asked to target obviously the area that's identified as the worst, and then to spread out. So yes, they have all of the information for all of the areas within their council.
Sorry, thanks, Stuart.
Okay. How can we be assured that the contractor assurance for this scheme is better than the Warm Homes scheme? How can we be assured that there will be no rogue traders out there trying to sell particular boilers or gas versus oil or whatever? How has this scheme addressed any concerns that there either may have been in the past, or what strengthening is there in this scheme to ensure that people get A, a fair deal, and B, that they get the highest quality of service?
The technical specification and the technical inspection will be carried out by housing executive staff. So they go into a property and their technical people who have worked in warm home scheme can see if there's cavity wall insulation needed, loft insulation needed, what work has to be done. The specification for the cost of the works has also been developed with the housing executive, so there is an agreed rate that will be paid for each job, so someone can't come along then and produce a figure which is outside of that technical specification. And works when heating's been installed or when insulation's been installed, building control officers have to carry out an inspection on that. So there will be an inspection once the work's been completed to make sure that it meets the required standard.
And in terms of trade qualifications and those standards, how can we be assured that those contractors that are coming forward to offer the service will meet the high standards that are required for this very vulnerable group of people?
Well, for gas, for instance, all installers must be gas safe registered. For electrical work, they must be NIC, EIC, and I'm not sure what that stands for, but I'm told that's the recognised.
Electrical contract.
Okay. For insulation, there's also an insulation standard that's required. So those are the standards that will be required before someone can become involved.
And finally, Chair, these contractors will be entering the homes of people who will be either themselves particularly vulnerable or may have vulnerable children or other adults in the home. How can we be assured that those people entering those homes will have the necessary checks conducted on them to ensure that they will behave themselves when they are in people's property?
I suppose from boiler replacement, we're taking it on the basis on boiler replacement. This hasn't been an issue, and similarly, vulnerable homes, contractors have been going in, warm homes they've been going in. It hasn't been an issue. Nothing has been reported back to us.
No.
There's something we can discuss with the housing executive. We'll take back and discuss with them, but I'm not aware of any scheme where there are government scheme where there are police checks on or some similar on contractors.
Okay.
We'll discuss it with the housing executive and come back to the committee at a later stage.
But as Stephen said, it hasn't been something that has been raised in relation to warm homes or boiler replacement in the past. There's no requirement there at present that I'm aware of, but it is something that we're happy to check out and get back to.
Sorry, just finally, Chair, just in relation to Northern Ireland, the group of contractors that have currently delivered the service, how likely is it that that pool of people will change as a result of this scheme, or are we essentially looking at the same people who have given that assurance in the past?
The scheme, the current warm home scheme is delivered by 2 contractors, as you know. This new scheme is different, and it will be open to smaller businesses and to other installers. The existing scheme managers and contractors will be eligible to carry out any of the work in line with anyone else. So they will be equally placed to put a bid into a household to carry out work to their property.
Just before I bring Trevor in, obviously because it's now been extended to smaller contractors, the likelihood is that local contractors that the people might know, so there'll be a better local relationship there. So that might be one of the issues.
benefit.
You know.
It has been something that was raised several times with warm homes, that especially elderly people, if there was a contractor who was known to them or to their family, that they would prefer to have someone like that come into their home to carry out work.
However, at the same time, Chair, we go back to the whole issue of the standards be delivered, and it may be that a small contractor can deliver those standards, but that may also be more difficult for them compared to larger organisations.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose I'm somewhat concerned maybe in terms of where the question was going there, because we're talking about vulnerable people here, and actually it's probably more often them who tune into this and the BBC stuff in terms of watching Democracy Live and different programmes. What we could do here is build fear. I mean, we're actually putting an insinuation here that contractors are unsafe people and that they should have safety checks and what have you. Let's be honest here. The first port of call on any of these is actually an official from either a council or the councils or the housing centres. And they're going to work in conjunction in terms of the appointment of the contractors. And certainly I can speak from my time in Antrim Borough Council. The officials who came from Antrim Borough Council actually guided the constituents through that. I certainly wouldn't want to be building fear in anyone here. We're trying to target very vulnerable people here. We're not trying to give any more fear than they're already living in as it is. So I would just hate the wrong type of message to go out from terms of Stuart's line of questioning.
But to just make the point, I think people have more common sense sometimes than we give them
I
credit.
think you're right, Chairman, yes.
Mr. Allister?
People who, maybe on income grounds, don't qualify for the current warm home scheme, but who will qualify on the affordable warmth scheme, they can't do anything until the 31st of March, is that right?
No, once the scheme is launched and from the beginning of October, council staff will be going into the areas which are being targeted to start this conversation. But accepting that it will take some time, and as part of the pilots, particularly with older householders, sometimes it took 2 or 3 visits back to a household to persuade someone to take up the measures which were on offer. So to allow for that, warm homes as a self-referral scheme will still exist until the 31st of March. Then it will cease and it will be replaced with affordable warmth. But if anyone who earns less than £20,000 is in an area which is being targeted, they're eligible for the measures as soon as the scheme launches, which will be, which is launches today, but then will actually start.
If they're not in such an area, but would be eligible on the, because they're under 20,000, when can they apply?
We want the maps to be the guiding tool in this, and we want those areas of severe fuel poverty to be targeted. But we have said that there may be some individuals who have exceptional circumstances who may ask the council to include them as a referral to the housing executive, even though they're outside the targeted area, and those referrals will be at the discretion of the council officials then who are carrying out the work. So if you had someone who had a particularly bad problem with a property and they were in a council area that was number 26 on the map and they weren't due to be targeted for some time, but they made an approach through a health a practitioner or someone acting on their behalf.
Special circumstance.
That could be looked at.
Part of this is around, Deputy Chair, as Mrs Kelly mentioned, we're trying to target the resources that we have on those in greatest need. So that's why the self-referral mechanism isn't something we're actively promoting, but if somebody comes forward, then councils can make a judgment around somebody's needs versus the target.
These maps are going to be readily available?
The maps are with all of the councils. Each council has its individual.
Are they online?
No, they aren't online. I'm not sure if they could go online. They're very large documents, but each council has their 26 council maps, and then what that looks like whenever they're transferred into the new super councils and what that does to them.
But it is.
So if we as public representatives want to familiarise ourselves with the delineations, we'd have to go to the council.
Well, we could see what we can do and what we could send to you by way of information if you think it would be useful. Yeah.
I think it would.
Just before I take Fran, Trevor, you want to briefly again?
Just in terms of the maps, maybe, Eilish, could you tell me how the maps were actually formulated? Because I'd be scared that we're actually looking at concentrated areas and not isolated areas. I'm sure Jim would be answering, given that both of us represent rural constituencies. And so how are they formulated?
Well, and I'm not an expert on this, but I can tell you that the University of Ulster pulled together all of the available information around the benefits, income levels, temperature zones,
energy efficiency ratings.
Warm homes measures have been carried out previously, so there is a really good spread across the council areas between urban and rural areas.
Okay.
And when this was being piloted, it was piloted in urban and rural areas because we're conscious of our obligation to rural-proof any of the policies that we're introducing.
We funded, Deputy Chair, over the last number of years a lot of very rigorous statistical work, and it's looking at income, it's looking at energy efficiency, it's looking at temperature, so we tried to bring together all the information that we hold within government and put it in a fairly complicated algorithm. I don't pretend to understand the detail, but that gives us those figures. So, and it is, as Ely said, it's a really good spread right across urban and rural. And perhaps you have some comfort when if we're able to send you the maps.
Yeah. Well, just on that point, I think we all represent rural constituencies. According to Fry, even 30% of his constituency is rural. So 32%, which is probably Dundee Park or somewhere, but that's.
I don't know where it is.
Any cows are there?
There's a couple of miles from it.
Belfast.
North Belfast.
But and I think it's actually a very important point that Trevor raised, and I'm glad to see, because although I live in the city, I am very conscious that there's some very serious problems in terms of heating in homes in rural communities, and I think it's long overdue that there's a concentration in trying to not only bring heating, but the proper type of heating to people that live in rural communities. And but I think it will be kept up to date on information how that is working, because I know when these are rolled out, sometimes it provides difficulties. I think, and the question of Stuart, I think by and large, most people that go into a house bring their qualifications with them, and I don't know why it's still regarded as Corgi registered people, or that has moved on, but usually find that people coming in have those qualifications.
Thank you. Just on the point to do with people that don't live within the zone, Dolores would know as well as I would, working as an MT, and me with social work background, that there's so many people that live in areas that you wouldn't imagine would be in fuel poverty. There's lots of there, so it might be worth actually having a word with the occupational therapy and social work department, especially in hospitals, because that's very often where you find when you've got someone in and you're speaking to them, and you actually find out, where you live in such and such area, you must, be fine. They're not. They're absolutely not. So they wouldn't ideally be in contact with any of the benefit services, but quite often they'll maybe have a social worker or an OT involved, and they're your really good source of information for clients.
They are. And we have, the Public Health Agency have been involved in the conversations that we've had around the pilot. I would like to say that some of the early maps that were produced as part of this were showing high levels of fuel poverty, and they weren't in areas where you would have expected to see fuel poverty. A lot of them were homes where there were very elderly people who were in properties that had been their family home. Were very hard for them to treat now, were having health conditions. So we were, well, not just a surprise because we work in the area, but it would have been a surprise to many people to see some of the areas which were coming up on maps as being high concentrations of severe fuel poverty.
And can I just add, Deputy Chair, I think Mrs Bradley makes an excellent point. The housing executives worked quite hard over the last number of years to develop good relationships with occupational therapists around adaptations in disabled facilities grant. So we'll take that point back to them to just make sure that those same relationships can be used.
I know through working in the hospital social work team up in Antrim, the OTs and the social workers always had all the leaflets in their files, and at the moment spoke to everybody, especially the OT department, about the different schemes available. So it's just something else for them to have the knowledge of it as well.
There's a sensible suggestion. I know in my own constituency there are community-based OTs in Uri who are actually based in the community and have a sort of very good working knowledge. But I think the consensus is from the committee that we would welcome this new scheme, and obviously the committee will continue to monitor the success otherwise. And I would presume all of us in our constituency offices will get some feedback from our constituents who have availed of this and how successful it is, because I know with Warm Homes the general feedback was very good. It's certainly my own experience of talking to people who had that scheme installed. So, I think it's something that obviously we'll keep an eye on. And once again, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Off late this morning, Stephen?
Sorry?
It's off late this morning.
Like so?
The next presentation is developer contributions for affordable housing. It's a departmental briefing, and it's on page 263 of your papers. I'd welcome the following officials: Stephen, who is becoming a permanent fixture, I think, and Francis Rush, and Housing Division DSD, and Heather McKinley. And the briefing's on page 264 of your packs. So just without further ado, just ask you to go ahead. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Deputy Chair. The Department signalled its intention to consult on developer contributions in the housing strategy back in 2012-13. The basis of our consultation proposals have been developed over the last 6 years in conjunction with with DOE, Planning Service, with the construction industry, with the housing executive and with housing associations. The aim of the developer contributions policy is to increase the number of social affordable homes, firstly. Secondly, to unlock land supply for social and affordable housing. And thirdly, to help create more sustainable mixed tenure communities. We see developer contributions as a key element in the new strategic planning policy statement, which DOE is consulting on, or just finished consulting on. And that's been developed in advance of planning powers transferring to councils from April 2015. We launched our consultation in June, and it finishes. We've extended the period of consultation, and it finishes on the 23rd of September. And there's a parallel consultation being taken forward by DOE. Heather's just going to briefly take the committee through the key elements of our consultation paper, and then Francis will finish just by reflecting on the responses we've had to consultations so far.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing I would say that the policy picture on developer contributions across the UK and indeed in the Republic of Ireland is not a uniform one. Various different local councils and different jurisdictions operate slightly different variations on a scheme of developer contributions. And indeed, nor is that policy picture a static one. Councils seem to be regularly reviewing the different levels at which they set the contribution. So it's not a uniform picture, nor is it a static one. And of course, we are keen to look at all those various different experiences and to learn from the picture across the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. And we're hoping that our consultation will give us an opportunity to make sure that we learn those lessons and take appropriate input. The proposals that we currently have out for consultation would require planning authorities to seek contributions from developers for affordable housing as a proportion of all newly proposed housing developments above a threshold number of dwellings. The proposals would not apply retrospectively on developments where planning permission has already been granted, and I think that's a key point, and will allay some concerns of the development industry, perhaps where they have purchased land and got planning permission at the very height of the market before the crash. The department has highlighted that the proportion of affordable housing required from developers will have to be economically viable to developers, or they won't develop. And I think we recognise that. And we intend that the policy would be appropriately balanced between meeting housing need, both today and indeed in the future, but also ensuring that the construction industry is allowed to continue its recovery after the crash. So an important balance, I think, there. The economics of the development can be tested using an economic viability model, similar versions of which are used elsewhere in developer contributions. But it is proposed that if the developer can make a profit of 15% over the whole development, and that includes both their market housing and the affordable element, then the development would be deemed viable for scheme contribution. Also in the proposals is that the affordable housing contribution requirement would be applied to all developments of 5 units or over. Contributions will be sought according to a preferential order, the first priority of which would be housing units on site. And I think, again, that's a key point, because housing associations have indicated that actually access to development sites and land supply is key to them, perhaps even more so than finance. It's a key issue, and hence that housing units on site would be a first priority. I think also important to point out that while the policy objectives on developer contributions are of additional affordable homes and of working towards mixed tenure, while those are foremost in our minds, we have said throughout the consultation process so far that in terms of the model, we are very keen to take input and are taking this consultation process very seriously. So the objectives are there, but in terms of the model, keen to learn and to take input from experts.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As Stephen said, the consultation launched in June 2014, and both departments have extended the consultation period from 8 to 12 weeks in recognition of the considerable interest in developer contributions, but also to ensure thorough engagement. So the consultation now closes on the 23rd of September. During the period of consultation so far, the department have met with the Construction Employers Federation and a representative number of developers. We've also met with the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations, and just yesterday we held a consultation engagement event which was really well attended with about 150 representatives, including planners, developers, but also housing associations and local government representatives. I think it's fair to say that thus far we do have a sense that the principle of developer contributions is agreed, and that Northern Ireland can't continue to be the only jurisdiction that doesn't have such a system. However, I think it's also fair to say that we have also heard concerns about the timing of any implementation and also the model as proposed in the current consultation document. As Heather has alluded to, within the boundaries of the overall objectives, we have said that we're willing to hear alternative proposals, and we are hopeful that these will be forthcoming as part of the consultation process. And finally, just then, we will be happy to come back and update the committee once the consultation formally closes and we're able to give you a sense of the responses received. Thank you.
Thanks very
happy
much.
to take questions.
Thanks. Just before I bring members in, how does the 20%, the proposed 20% contribution compare with other areas?
I think it would be. Sure. As I say, there's not a standard approach across other areas. I think it would be in line with a number of areas operate a range, 15 to 18, for example, percent. What I would also perhaps say is that we are proposing the 20%. If we can look to see reasons why it would vary from that, or indeed that we would include a range, then we are very open to look at that. I think 20% originally was one of the recommendations from SEMPL, the SEMPL report.
Thanks for that. Just a couple more questions. Just in other regions, rather than provide a housing unit, some developers will give like a commuted sum or vice versa. Is that something that you envisage happening?
It is one of the, as Heather outlined, Deputy Chair, it's one of the suite of options. The objectives are very much around encouraging mixed tenure, sustainable communities, unblocking land supply, so it wouldn't be the preference. But there would be cases where it might be the most reasonable option. If a developer, for example, was building a small estate of executive detached houses, probably, we don't want necessarily executive detached houses for social housing. So in that case, a commuted sum might be a preferable. Or there might be alternatives. I mean, there may be ways of a developer perhaps gifting land that he or she holds in another place. You know, so there are different ways of doing it, but commuted sum wouldn't be our preference, but it is in there in the menu of options.
Of course, it begs the question that if there's a commuted sum, that DSD will actually use it to build social housing.
Well, one of the difficulties, Deputy Chair, I think, is in a time of financial constraint, the Department of Finance and personnel may expect that commuted sum to go into the centre, and it may not necessarily be spent on social and affordable housing. So it's another reason why we would prefer. I mean, we very much see developer contributions as the icing on the cake rather than a replacement for existing spend on social and affordable housing.
I think it was 2008, 2009, the previous mandate, the committee went to Dublin to look at developer contributions mixed tenure. Some of it worked very well, some of it didn't. But I think one of the difficulties is in a private development, where there is a developer's contribution, that the social housing end of it, they're kind of stuck in the corner and almost become like a mini ghetto within that development. And I think that's something that obviously needs to be avoided.
Yeah,
because you do have that ghettoisation, it has happened in other regions.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, at the event yesterday we had a range of speakers, and that was a message that came clearly across. There were examples of where it worked well and where it hadn't worked so well, and the scenario you've outlined was one that was put forward as where it doesn't work, and the importance of integration. So we've heard that feedback.
Thank you. Dolores?
Thank you, Chair. It's my understanding that the 20% is higher than any other jurisdiction, and indeed the ambition of your developer contributions proposals actually would take is that the houses, if you like, have to be gifted almost to DSD, and that's whereas in England the department or the local authority buys the houses at that market value of the developer. And some developers have said to me, I mean, would you be asking some of the big retailers to hand over 20% of their profits? I mean, because that's really what you're asking. And could you clarify for me whether or not the 20% is out of the 15% viable profit or within it?
Yeah, perhaps if, Deputy Chair, if I can come back on that. I mean, I think as Heather outlined, there are a number of different approaches taken in different jurisdictions. The model that we've suggested in our consultation paper is a model that's used in Bristol and Edinburgh. 20% is largely based, it's in and around the figure used in England, but it's probably at the upper end. It's partly on the, if we're bringing this in 5 units, on 5 unit schemes, 20% is 1 unit. Our original, way back, one of our original proposals was that it would be limited to 25 unit schemes, but the feedback from many people, including those in the construction industry, is that we have smaller developers and smaller schemes. Yeah. But as Heather said, we're flexible, we're looking at this. We've had a range of meetings with the industry, including the Construction Employers Federation, and we've been very clear that we are very open to listen to alternatives. But there are some core objectives that would need to be achieved, such as the ability to create mixed tenure communities and the ability to unlock land supply. The viability test in the model that we've suggested is very much based on, will the whole scheme work, including the gifting of the house? So it's the entirety of the scheme. So it's fine. So that the developer would still be able to make a 15% profit having gifted one of those houses.
So if I'm clear, then you're saying that overall the employer is entitled to make 15% profit. You're leaving them with 15% profit minimum.
Well, that would be.
I
mean, part of the consultation, we did a whole exercise, a financial viability test, and brought economists in several years ago when this was last looked at, and 15% is seen as a reasonable profit margin, an acceptable profit margin within the development community. So that's what the proposals are based on. But we're happy to listen to alternatives.
But it's 15%.
Something else.
After you've taken your cut out or before. I mean, I have spoken to developers and to others, and I understand the housing associations share some of the same concerns as the developers, and those are in and around the level of cut, if you like, that the department is seeking. They've also concerns around whenever they're going to open a new site, that people will be coming in and wanting to buy the site furthest away from the potential houses that are going to be gifted, you know, in terms of social engineering, that it will be that ghettoisation that you're talking about. And my constituency too has been badly hit by the fall in the construction industry, and some people find it very strange that a time in the construction industry is just beginning, and I'm saying very tentative beginning of growing again, and that they're going to be hit with additional fine, when we all know that the biggest gain has been the landowner who sold the land at the big margin. And you have to set that in the context of a department that has had to return over the last 2 years £50 million of money set aside for social housing. You can't even spend what you've already got. So, you know, there's a lot of concerns about the efficiency and effectiveness within the department and the housing executive or social housing in building. So I really, I think, however, I'd have to say that there's a broad welcoming for development contributions, and I do think that is something that, as I understand, right across the sector, people are going to welcome, but it's going to be the nature and very much the content of your proposals, and at the moment, I think there's a lot of concerns that you're overreaching.
Deputy Chair, if I can just come back on the second point first, around underspend. I mean, the committee, we were sitting listening to the Audit Office report. I mean, most of the underspend was on the maintenance side for the reasons that the committee knows very well. Last year, our underspend on social housing new build was £1 million.
Sorry, there was 10 million not spent, that was buyback. There was 10 million for buyback that wasn't spent. So that's not correct, strictly correct.
Well, the figures that I had left in my budget for social housing development programme last year was £1 million, and we achieved the target. But the issue on timing, I think, is ultimately it's a political decision, and the Chair last time we were here was very clear with us on that point, that ultimately this is a political decision. We will make recommendations and we will provide analysis in the consultations, but ultimately this is a decision for elected members, not for us. So certainly that will be something, and Francis has made the point in terms of the consultation, we'll be reflecting back in the consultation summary what people have told us, but ultimately that's a decision really for Stormont to make.
Sure, I appreciate that, but your level and your degree of options available to us to make decisions, you know, based on good evidence, will actually have to be ones that are sensible and not things that we're just going to throw out because they're just so impractical that they're going to paralyse an industry that's just coming out of recession.
I think in terms of planning PPS 22, one of the objectives, or the objective, is to provide affordable housing within the community, and developers' contributions is one of the ways of doing that.
Absolutely, Chair.
I think the difficulty is that the committed sums may go back to DFP rather than actually towards the building of social housing.
Absolutely.
That's an issue. Mr. Anderson, next.
You accept this as social engineering?
No, I don't think we would. I mean, there's a lot of evidence around the benefits of mixed tenure development, and with the right to buy policy, which has been in place for a number of years, in essence, that is what has happened in Northern Ireland anyway. So we already have mixed tenure communities. The academic evidence points to the fact that that is a good thing. There are issues around how we manage this. I mean, we acknowledge that. And there are some really good examples, and there are some really poor examples. But in terms of our role as officials in making recommendations, I suppose the evidence is there to say this is a good thing, but I wouldn't accept that it's social engineering, and it has already happened in Northern Ireland as a result of...
You're saying socially it's a good thing, and you're trying to engineer to get to that point? How could it not be social engineering?
Well, it's not. I mean, it's happening anyway. I mean, for example, the private rented sector has gone from a position of 5% in Northern Ireland to 16%. A lot of new developments over the last number of years are already mixed tenure developments because the private rented sector is there. What we are saying is that mixed tenure is happening, and this policy is aiming to do that in a way which is managed and which is sensible, and but it's already there in an unmanaged way already, so we're just building, trying to do this in a more managed way.
You're trying to do it at a very difficult time economically. Are there any examples since the recession where anyone else has successfully introduced it?
It has been in England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland for a considerable period of time.
Before the recession?
15 years.
Before the recession, yes.
Are there any examples since the recession?
No, because it was already in existence in those places.
Do you think it was perhaps viable at a time at a time when there were very significant profits in development and companies were cash rich, that it was viable to introduce something like that then, but probably very difficult to introduce it now, where so many companies are cash strapped?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of points on that. I suppose the first one is financial viability is at the heart of our proposal. So even if the Assembly were to make a decision that this were to be introduced in the near future, it would not be used unless there was unless the development was financially viable. So we very much accept that point. So the second thing is, while developer contributions has been in England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland for some time, a similar scheme to pay for infrastructure called the Community Infrastructure Levy has been introduced in England since the downturn in the housing market and has been relatively successfully introduced. But financial viability absolutely is one of our core concerns and will be part of anything that we recommend to both the Minister and yourselves in future.
Stephen, we always, constituency representatives can think of an abundance of examples. When we think around our constituencies of unfinished housing development schemes, unfinished roads, people living in an absolute nightmare situation where they bought at the top of the market and can't even contemplate selling because so many developers have gone bust. Do you really think you're operating in the real world with these proposals?
We think it's a balance needs to be struck. Clearly a balance needs to be struck. And we have been clear from the outset that, and we were clear in the consultation that this should be introduced at a time that is right. Another part of our work is the Housing Supply Forum, which is very much looking at how to encourage supply. So we're very, very aware that there's a balance to be struck. Whether this is the right time or not is something that we will reflect on as part of the consultation response. We've very much heard the message from the development community that it isn't the right time, and that is something that we will reflect in our responses. But yes, ultimately there will be a decision to be made. Is this the right time or not?
Well, the Minister obviously thought it was the right time to issue the consultation.
There was very much a strategic opportunity with the launch of the consultation on the strategic planning policy statement and planning powers going to councils to at least consult on this. But ultimately there will need to be a decision on whether it is the right time to introduce it. But the time was right strategically. The conversation and the consultation, in our view and in the Minister's view, had to happen. There's another decision needs to be made about following this, whether it is introduced or not.
Could I just ask you about this sentence? These proposals would not apply retrospectively on developments where planning permission has already been granted. But we know there are many planning permissions granted and which haven't been built because of the current economic situation. Planning permissions are time limited, they expire, and the norm is that the developer then renews the planning permission. In renewing a planning permission, does he still have this protection? Or would that, because it's a new planning permission, rob him of that protection?
I think that's something that we would need to look at very carefully, because developer contributions, the way it would work would be the land price, the land sale price would be reflective of the developer contribution. If a developer has bought land and a planning permission has expired, the developer has a sunk cost already. That's something I think we would need to look at. It's not something I can give you an answer on today, but it's clearly an issue that needs to be examined very carefully.
Well, if the principle is that you're trying to show some deference to developers who bought at the top of the market and had a planning permission which they haven't implemented. The fact that they then have to get a new planning permission to keep it alive, surely you'd have to extend the exemption to that as well.
One thing, if I might just add, our colleagues on the DOE side of this, who we've been working with, did talk yesterday at our event around the fact that that would apply to both interim planning and full planning. And I think that particular part of it, that showing that appropriate deference to that came very much from previous engagement we've had with the construction employer side. And indeed, a further proposal that they made was they would like to see not only it not being retrospective on planning permission, but they may also suggest that it wouldn't be retrospective on land purchase, so where they already have bought the land, obviously at a particular price. They would go further than not on retrospectively on planning permission, but also not retrospectively on land already purchased.
So that surely would have to be the benchmark if you're going to
We
the difference you're talking about.
We said we would certainly take that away as part of the
I
consultation.
know, I can ask, what, if any, has the role of the Strategic Investment Board been in promoting this?
The Strategic Investment Board, to my knowledge, has not been involved other than as a consultee. They don't have any particular statutory authority. The statutory authority for the introduction of this, if it is introduced, will be with DOE and DSD. So beyond being a consultee, I'm not aware of any involvement of the Strategic Investment Board.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Well, presumably, whatever happens, unless there's a buy-in from developers, it's not going to happen in that sense, because it's a valid point about the retrospective planning and that, because that's something obviously you will have to look at. Stuart?
Chair, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. What contribution will this make to the concept of shared space and shared housing and shared communities? That's really a key factor for me in any housing policy initiatives that we take in terms of how that will make a positive contribution to shared living for people in Northern Ireland. Secondly, I do, round the table, share most of the concerns that at this point in time, this may be very difficult for developers to contemplate in terms of their costing models. But what checks are in place to ensure that those costs are not actually passed on to the people who are buying the houses in the private sector? And I think just an area of comment, you're in an area of discussion about, I suppose in a sense, additional regulation or additional controls over the private development sector. And as local authority, and many people around this table who've been involved as local authority members will know how difficult it has been, for example, over the last number of years to persuade developers to provide any valuable open space in private developments. In fact, you know, 2 teaspoonfuls of soil and a bit of grass usually does as open space. And therefore the open space requirements that the planning have been allowing and developers have been resisting in the private sector fall miserably behind the excellent open space that there is in most public sector housing. And how will that balance be addressed, or is there a potential to address that balance in this policy?
Okay. There's 3 issues really there on the issue of shared housing. Shared housing is not a distinct objective within this policy. However, we are working under the Together Building United Community agenda on a mixed-use, mixed-tenure shared policy, and we are working with the Housing Association on a potential signature project and testing the viability of that, which is a large development. So there are other things that we are doing that will contribute, and if there is a way to link sensibly both policies, then we will certainly do that, and we hope to be out to consultation later this year on that policy. The issues with the cost being passed on, this really follows on from our response to Mr. Alistair, Deputy Chair, in that the principle is that the costs of this for the developer are reflected in the land price. And developers, I had a conversation with a developer last week who works both in England and in Northern Ireland, and he very much reflected that's what he does in the south of England. So at least the principle and how it works in other jurisdictions, as far as we understand it, is that the cost is reflected in the land price that the developer pays. So it does help to contain land prices. The third point in open space, this is an issue that we have been raising through the Housing Supply Forum, because for us there is an issue of good urban design and density, and we've just funded a study with the Housing Executive done by the University of Ulster on comparative housing in Berlin and Belfast, and they looked particularly at one of our housing association developments off the Ormer Road and compared it to a development in Berlin. So just to give you one example, the density of housing on the Lower Ormer Road was about a fifth of that in Berlin, but the Berlin development had more open space. So for us, this is about promoting good design. There is a way of developers achieving profitability and developing open space, but there is a lack of innovation. And what we're trying to do through other things that we're doing is to promote innovation. And the lead on that study, Professor Dougal Sheridan, is coming to talk to the Housing Supply Forum, and I understand the Construction Employers Federation are going to invite him. So what we're trying to do is promote what good design can look like, combining open space with good design and proper density. So that's more of a promotion piece of work that we're doing.
Chair, and there's one who would fully support the introduction of developers' contributions. And mine goes back the sample report. I think it was about 12 years ago now. That was one of the main recommendations that came out of there. Out of that, and some of the arguments that I'm listening to people making around this, people against it, were made then. They were saying you can't put pressure on developers and expect them to give parts of their sites everything, and they were making 10 fortunes at the time. So no matter when you think, I actually think it's long overdue. I know that there's been serious problems with it, but you can never have an attitude of saying, well, we'll never be in a position to do that. Many places throughout England that they've read. I know that in London, I think when Ken Livingstone was mayor there was probably a 35%. I think had been introduced in making thousands of houses for people that wouldn't have had houses at that time. Obviously, you have to find the balance. I'm actually quite surprised, and I'm sorry that Dolores is away, because it was Margaret Ritchie initially argued and brought it, came in through the sample report and fully endorsed the developers' contributions, although again they weren't delivered at that time. I don't think that they're in today's age that there's purely a social housing estate. They're all mixed tenure estates. They're all either private and social, with some affordable through anything. All the indications and all reports have argued that that's the best way forward, and the mix actually helps with the thing. It's just a couple of questions, and hold on, is there a beginning, say a threshold of how many houses there needs to be on the site, or before this kicks in?
Yeah, in our consultation it's 5.
5. Yeah. I think that's been generally the figure that there has been. I think that the acceptance of a payment, not to go through may in itself be a bad thing. I think there was some serious problems in other jurisdictions when these payments were made, and some councils used that in a way of having to fill their coffers rather than looking at the end product, which was a house for a person that may not have it. So I think it's the sooner it comes in, the better. I think that it's not surprising that, and Dolores said it, that developers have always been against it, and they'll fight and kick to try and stop the thing coming in. But if you talk to developers again in other jurisdictions, after a while they get used to the interesting thing is, and you said it, which has come in over the past few years, is a community gain. And it turns about infrastructure, road infrastructure, community infrastructure that people are asking developers to pay into. You know, rather than accepting payments, and I think instead of houses, that also should be one of the things that we should be looking at to ensure that it's getting done within areas.
Okay. Trevor. Thanks, Deputy Chair. Stephen, I'll be joining the sceptical wing in this one, I'd have to say.
Surprised.
No, I mean, it's okay. Everyone go out and work for everyone else, and others stay at home and do nothing. That's what this is to me. I mean, we have developers who've taken big risks. We have developers who went to the wall in terms of the big risks they've taken. I mean, it's easy to make a statement in terms of taking 20% of whatever they make, but is there ever going to be a case we're going to give them 20% of whatever they lose? You know, we always talk about the profitable end of the story. We never talk about the times whenever the developers lose money. So I'm definitely a sceptic in this one, I have to say. Stephen, you also made a statement in terms of the 16% in terms of the mixed tenure, how it increased in terms of the mixed in terms of the private sector, sorry, the social sector has moved into those. I mean, I think if you actually start to look at why some of our estates or some of the developments we actually have that should have been primarily private developments, the reason they've went into that social sector is because of the difficulties that some of them faced, and there's no option but to open them up for that, actually to try and recoup some of the losses that they may have had. But following the question that Jim asked, Jim pointed out somewhere there in terms of the document that developers who own land or have already got permissions will be exempt. And if you take that in terms of the economic climate we're in today, really what you're saying is those who have not purchased land need not purchase because they couldn't compete with those who already have got land banks. Because already the person who's holding the land bank with the permission has got a 20% advantage over the person who has no land nor no permission. So really what you're doing is you're actually going to stifle development in Northern Ireland, where a developer is going to go out and try and gain permission, but try and compete with those who have land and land banks and planning permissions, but will be fit to sell at 20% less.
Just on that last point, Deputy Chair, what has been reflected back to us by the development community is that a lot of the land bank was bought at top prices. So, you know, if a developer contribution were to come in, the contribution of the developer would be reflected in the land price. So it would, somebody buying land following the implementation of this.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because some of the developers have also bought land back from the banks, where other developers have lost, which is their holding permissions. So we're not talking historic prices here. We're talking about some developers. Unfortunately, many developers went to the wall. We had land banks out there that the banks were keen to get rid of at considerably less, and developers have stepped in and bought that with permissions. So they're now holding land with permissions at considerably less than it was originally sold for. But the developer who will step up to the plate now in terms of trying to satisfy your developer contribution will be a disadvantage in terms of the competitive edge of the developer who's already holding a land bank with permission, because they are not going to be, the developer contribution is not going to be applied to them, nor should it be.
I think that's why financial viability is at the heart of our model. I mean, if it doesn't stack up, if it's not financially viable for the developer to make what would be seen as a good profit, then it wouldn't go forward. So I think it's a really good point, but I suppose I would argue that it's already there in our model. But yes, it is a very good point. Financial viability has to be at the heart of this, because it has to work for everybody.
The other thing you talked about in response to someone else earlier, this would unlock land supply. What about the housing executive and other public bodies unlocking the land supply and land banks that they already own themselves and developing those, as opposed to expecting someone else to develop them for you?
In our view, Deputy Chair, it's not an either-or. We're also doing that. The housing executive, I think around a third of the social housing development programme last year was on land owned by the public sector, including the housing executive. We're very actively pushing the development of public sector land for social housing, and where there isn't a social housing need, we're looking at it, and it's Francis's team that's doing this, for affordable housing, and we're trying to develop projects with housing associations using some innovative finance. So it's not an either-or, we're doing both.
Deputy Chair, possibly useful maybe in terms of what the public sectors hold, in terms of land that is available for building. Whilst this conversation is going on about developer contributions and unlocking land supply, I think it would be interesting if we could get a piece of paper in terms of what the public sector is actually holding.
Well, yeah, I think that's again a valid point, but I think your scepticism is duly noted.
Yeah.
But obviously, the land has to be where there is need. And it's interesting to note in terms of developers, when DSD were buying off the shelf a few years ago, particularly under the reign of Margaret Ritchie, the department had to spend an average of 5,000 to 8,000 to bring those houses up to decent home standards, because they were being built below decent home standards. So maybe that's another thing that maybe needs to be looked at as well. Why you wanted in just for... Well, just to think, I actually think Trevor made a good argument there for Nettle and that just bring it in, and regardless of whether they've planning permission or not. Just I think that's a good argument you put up for, so that there is no difference between...
You're going to continually rob those who want to go out and work every day. Just about welfare reform,
we all go out to work every day.
Look after those who
but there are those
sit at
that are unfortunate, that are stuck in hostels and stuck in waiting lists for the thing. But they are, I think one of our problems is, and people talked about it, and that was that there are developers that have sat in land, that are strategically placed pieces of land, that are waiting on the day that it'll go back to 207 prices. And I think what you need to do is to look at how you vest that and bring it back into, I think that's part of that whole thing.
It's more robbery. Northern Bank Mark III, is this, or Mark II?
I think
That's a great place to be.
I think we're aware of the feelings around the table. Thanks very much for the presentation. No doubt, Stephen, we'll be seeing you again and again.
Purchaser-led payments. If I want to buy a house, I have to pay the 20%.
The next item is proposed subordinate legislation. It's SL1, the Job Seekers Alliance, Attorney Alliance, Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2014. Draw members' attention to page 269 of your packs. The Department proposes to make a separate rule to make consequential amendments to the Job Seekers Alliance regulations following the introduction of a 14-week maternity allowance for pregnant women who participate in their self-employed spouses or civil partners' business but receive no income from doing so. The rule will be subject to confirmatory resolution procedure before the Assembly. I would ask if the committee's content for the rule to be made.
Absolutely.
I think this is actually something that's beneficial to women
Definitely.
in that situation.
What are they getting now?
I would seek agreement, if people are in agreement, to proceed. Thank you. Next item is correspondence. Draw members' attention to correspondence memo on page 274 of your packs. Draw members' attention to page 275. In response to a letter from the committee, the Department has written to reaffirm the Housing Executive's assertion that the maintenance budget will be spent. So if members are in agreement with that. And just ask members if they're content to action the remaining correspondence as outlined in the correspondence memo.
Great.
Members are in agreement.
Yep. For once.
And just draw members' attention to the draft forward work programme at page 290 of your packs, and ask members if they're content with the forward work programme as drafted, which has been amended following discussion at last week's meeting to accommodate inquiry evidence sessions on Thursday rather than Tuesdays. Because I think people felt Thursdays was more appropriate in terms of getting that aspect done. So members are in agreement. And just ask members if they have any other business.
The Minister on Tuesday in the House assured us that there would be an early response to our long outstanding query about the fact-finding investigation into Special Advisor. I assume there's been no response?
No.
No, Chair, the letter, Chair just signed the letter just the other day. It's gone and we haven't had formal responses yet.
Just on that point, the Minister actually said about getting the letter from the Chair and there would be a reply within 10 days, but he failed to specify, in my view, was it 10 days from you received the letter or 10 days from you were speaking in the Assembly on Tuesday, I think.
I took it was from 10 days from me receipt to here.
I must say, I thought that's what
You
he
would
was
assume
saying.
that to be the case, but he didn't specify, so.
And when would that 10 days elapse?
I can't remember when exactly the letter went out.
Wednesday or Thursday?
Yeah,
Should have been around now.
so probably will not
By
be
next week?
maybe next week, yeah.
We live in hope.
So if you can't take it, just hope for it.
The next committee meeting for short development take place on Thursday, the 18th of September at 10, room 29. Just remind members that this will be a long session as the committee will take a briefing from senior DSD and housing executive officials in the planned maintenance settlement, followed by inquiry phase 3 evidence sessions, and the planned maintenance briefing will be taken in the morning. The committee will break for lunch and reconvene at 1 p.m. And I propose that the committee does now adjourn.
Agreed.